Text message came in on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my housecoat, standing at the kitchen counter waiting for my coffee to finish brewing. It was from my son. "Dad, we need you to stop dropping by without notice. Actually, we think it would be better if you gave us some space for a while. We want peace in our home. Please respect that." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and poured my coffee. I didn't call him back. I didn't text. I just stood at the window and looked out at the backyard, at the old cedar deck I'd built with my own hands, the summer he turned 12, at the birch trees I'd planted when his mother was still alive. The coffee was too hot to drink and I held it anyway. "My name is Douglas." No, wait. Let me start further back, because if I just tell you about the text message, none of it makes sense. My name is Owen. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a project estimator for a mid-size construction firm in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm not a rich man, but I'm comfortable. I own my home outright, I have a solid pension, and I made a point my entire working life of living below my means. My wife, Catherine, passed from ovarian cancer 11 years ago. Our son, Caleb, was 26 when she died. We got through it together, or so I thought. Caleb is 37 now. He married a woman named Stephanie 6 years ago. She's from a family with different ideas about money than ours. Not bad ideas necessarily, just different. Her parents had a cottage and 2 cars and credit cards and credit card and never seemed bothered by any of it. Caleb, who I had raised to save before he spent and to never borrow what he couldn't repay, seemed to change after the wedding. Gradually, like a tide going out, you don't notice it until the beach looks completely different. It started with the house. They'd found a semi-detached in Burlington, a good neighborhood, good schools for when they eventually had kids. The problem was the mortgage. They were short on the down payment. Caleb came to me, not with his hat in his hand exactly, but close. He said they'd found the perfect place and they just needed a little help to get into it. I gave them $40,000. I want to be clear, it was a gift, not a loan. I told him that explicitly. I didn't want the dynamic of debt between us. I gave it freely and I signed a gift letter for the bank, and I felt good about it. His mother would have done the same. The housewarming was lovely. Stephanie hugged me at the door and said I was the most generous father-in-law a person could ask for. Caleb made ribs on the new barbecue. We ate on the back patio and I drove home feeling like things were going to be all right. That was 4 years before the text message. In those 4 years, here is what else happened. Their furnace died the second winter. December, coldest week of the year. I paid for the replacement, a new high-efficiency unit, parts and labor, $3,100. The contractor was a man I knew from a job site years ago, so I got a fair price. I didn't mind. A furnace isn't a luxury. Then Caleb's car needed an engine rebuild that cost more than the car was worth. He came to me again. I helped him with half $1,100, so he could put the rest on a line of credit at a manageable rate. I remember him saying he'd pay me back when his contract renewed at work. He never mentioned it again, and I never brought it up. The following spring, Stephanie wanted to renovate the main bathroom. I thought that was their business, and I stayed out of it. But then Caleb called me one evening and mentioned casually that they were a bit stretched. The renovation quote had come in higher than expected, and would I be able to help with a short-term bridge until his bonus came through? $6,000. I transferred it the next morning. The bonus came through. The $6,000 did not come back. I'm not listing these things to build a case. I'm listing them because I want you to understand that when the text message arrived, I wasn't surprised. I was something else. I was clarified. Like when fog burns off a lake and you can finally see the far shore for what it is. My grandson Theo was born 3 years ago. He's the best thing. Dark curly hair, serious grey eyes like his grandmother had. He started calling me Pop when he was barely 2, and it went straight through me every time. I drove out to Burlington every second Sunday to see him. I always brought something, nothing extravagant, just a book or a toy truck or a bag of the maple leaf cookies he'd gotten fixated on. I'd sit on the floor with him and build things out of those foam blocks. Sometimes Caleb would join us, and it felt for an hour like the family I used to have. But I started noticing things. Stephanie would make a point of mentioning how tired they were, how busy. She'd say it while looking at her phone, not at me. There was a particular way she had of leaving the room when I arrived, not rudely exactly, but pointedly. Like my presence had created an inconvenience she was politely enduring. Caleb had started doing the same thing, following her cues, leaving me with Theo in the living room while they retreated to the kitchen and spoke in low voices. I told myself it was just the fatigue of young parents. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then came Christmas. I'd ask in October whether they'd be spending the holidays in Burlington or driving up to Stephanie's parents in Barrie. Caleb said they hadn't decided yet. I said I'd like to plan something. Maybe Christmas Eve at my place, the way we used to do when his mother was alive. He said he'd check with Stephanie and get back to me. He didn't get back to me. I asked again in November. He said they were still figuring it out. I stopped asking. On Christmas morning I woke up alone in my house in Hamilton, in the house where Caleb had grown up, with the tree I'd put up out of habit, and the presents I'd wrapped for Theo sitting under it. I texted Caleb at 9 in the morning. He responded at 2 in the afternoon with a photo of Theo opening something at what was clearly Stephanie's parents' house in Barrie. Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope you're having a good day. I made myself eggs. I ate them standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt worse. In January, Caleb called to tell me they'd need to replace the roof that summer, and the quote had come in at $14,000. He said they were going to look at a HELOC, but the rate wasn't great, and did I have any thoughts? I said I'd think about it. That was the first time I didn't say yes. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I thought about the furnace and the car and the bathroom and the down payment. I thought about Christmas morning. I thought about Stephanie leaving the room and Caleb following her. I thought about Theo on the floor with his foam blocks, not knowing any of it, just wanting to build a tower that didn't fall down. I called Caleb back and told him I couldn't help with the roof. I said I was sorry, but my own expenses had been higher than expected and I needed to be careful. None of that was true. I have a paid-off house and a defined benefit pension and a savings account that I have not needed to touch in 3 years. But I said it because I wasn't ready to say the true thing, which was, I'm tired of being useful to you without being valued by you. Caleb said he understood. His voice was flat in the way that meant he didn't. Spring came. They got the roof done. I don't know how they financed it, and I didn't ask. I kept my Sunday visits with Theo, though they felt different now. More formal. Stephanie had started being in the room more, which should have been pleasant, but wasn't, because when she was there, she managed the visit. She'd tell Theo it was time for his nap at 3 o'clock, exactly. Or she'd mention that they had plans that evening in a way that made the end of my visit feel engineered. In July, Caleb asked if I could take on a recurring e-transfer to help cover Theo's daycare. Just temporary, he said, until Stephanie went back to full-time at the end of the year. $450 a month. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about what it means to help someone you love, versus what it means to fund a version of your own exclusion. I thought about Theo's grey eyes. I transferred the first month. I did it for 4 months. In November, Stephanie went back to full-time at her firm. In December, the e-transfers had not been cancelled. I let one more go through in January before I stopped. Caleb didn't mention it. Not a word. That was February. Which brings me back to the text message. We want peace in our home. I set my phone face down and I drank my coffee. Then I did something I had not done in a very long time. I sat down at the kitchen table and I took out a piece of paper, actual paper, the back of an envelope, and I wrote down every dollar I had given or transferred to my son and daughter-in-law since the down payment. It took me a while. Some things I had to estimate. When I was done, I added it up. The number was just over $87,000. I sat with that number for a long time. Outside, the February light was thin and pale through the kitchen window. A pair of sparrows were fighting over something in the backyard. I watched them until they sorted it out and flew away. Then I called my financial advisor. I want to tell you that what I did next came from anger, because that would be a cleaner story. But it wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something quieter, a kind of sad, steady certainty, like when you finally admit to yourself that a thing you've been maintaining is beyond repair. I had a will that left everything to Caleb. I'd written it 3 years after Catherine died, when Caleb and I were still close, when grief had made us careful with each other. I called my lawyer, a woman I'd used for the purchase of my house, and I made an appointment. I also called my accountant. I had 2 significant assets outside my pension, my house and a small investment portfolio I'd built over 20 years of disciplined saving. I asked about my options. Nobody told me what to do. But I had been a project estimator for 31 years. I know how to assess what a thing is worth. And I know how to plan for what comes next. Over the following 6 weeks, I did 4 things. I updated my will. I left Theo a trust, a real one, managed through a trustee at the firm my lawyer recommended, releasing funds for his education and housing when he turned 25. Not to Caleb, not to Stephanie, to Theo directly, when he was old enough to use it for himself. The rest of the estate went to a mix of charities and a nephew in Guelph I've always been fond of. I transferred my house into a trust. This is something Canadians can do under certain conditions, and I worked with my accountant and lawyer to structure it correctly. It was not a dramatic move. It was a quiet administrative one, but it meant the house was no longer simply sitting there waiting to become someone else's windfall. I cancelled the pre-authorized transfers I had been making. There were 2 still running that I had barely thought about, a small monthly amount I'd set up 2 years ago as a vague gesture of goodwill, the way you leave a light on for someone. I turned them off, and I stopped going to Burlington. This last thing was the hardest, not because of Caleb and Stephanie, because of Theo. I thought about him every day. I kept the maple leaf cookies in the cupboard for 3 weeks before I finally ate them myself, standing at the counter one afternoon in March. I did not tell Caleb I had done any of this. I didn't send a letter or make a speech. I just became quiet, the way the house becomes quiet after someone has left it for the last time. He texted me in April to see if I wanted to join them for Easter. I said I already had plans. That was true. I drove down to Guelph and spent Easter with my nephew's family, and we had lamb and a very decent Niagara red, and his kids ran around the backyard with the Easter eggs I'd brought, and I sat in a lawn chair in the weak April sunshine and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was comfortable. Caleb texted again in May. He said Theo had been asking about Pop. I read the message twice and I thought about what I wanted to say. I said I'd love to see Theo and that he was welcome to bring him to Hamilton for an afternoon. Caleb said he'd check with Stephanie. He didn't follow up. What happened in June is the part I have been circling around, the part that is both the end of this story and the thing that made me understand what the previous 4 years had actually been. Caleb called me on a Wednesday evening. Not a text, a call. His voice was tight in the way it gets when he's worked himself up to saying something difficult, the same voice he'd had at 19 when he told me he'd put a dent in my truck. He said they were in trouble. The HELOC they'd taken for the roof had come due for refinancing, and the rates were not what they'd expected. Their mortgage was up for renewal in September. and the stress test was going to be brutal at current rates. Stephanie had taken on extra hours at work, but it wasn't enough. They were looking at the numbers, and the numbers didn't work. He paused. Then he said, "We might need to sell the house, Dad." I let the silence sit for a moment. I said, "I see." He said, "I was hoping. I don't know if there's anything." And then he stopped. I said, "Caleb, I want to be honest with you about something." He said, "Okay." I told him I'd updated my will in February. I told him about the trust for Theo. I told him about the house transfer. I told him that the assets he might have been counting on as a backstop, not because I'd ever promised them, but perhaps because I'd never specifically said otherwise, were structured differently now. The silence on the other end of the line was a very specific kind of silence. I know it because I've heard it on job sites. When a contractor realizes that the number he was counting on isn't available. He said, "When did you do all this?" I said, "February." Another silence. Then, right after you asked for space, I said, "Yes." "I want to tell you," he said, something that cracked things open, something that became the beginning of a real conversation. Maybe someday that conversation will happen. But that night, Caleb said he needed to think, and he got off the phone, and I sat in my kitchen in the quiet house and listened to the sound of the neighborhood settling into evening, a lawnmower somewhere on the street, a dog barking twice and stopping, the distant sound of the GO train. I wasn't happy exactly. I don't think you're supposed to feel happy about this. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years, something I'd almost forgotten I was entitled to. I felt like myself. 3 weeks later, Caleb drove to Hamilton without calling first. He knocked on the front door at 11 on a Saturday morning. I was in the backyard pulling weeds along the fence line. I heard the knock and I took off my gloves and I walked through the house and I opened the door. He had Theo with him. My grandson was in a red windbreaker with a truck on the chest, and when he saw me he said "Pop" and reached up his arms, and I picked him up and held him, and he smelled like syrup and sunshine the way small children do, and I held him tighter than I probably should have. Caleb looked at me over Theo's shoulder. He looked tired. Older than 37. He said, "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, me, my son, and my grandson. He was mostly interested in the biscuit tin I keep on the counter and not at all interested in the conversation between the adults around him. And Caleb talked. He talked for a long time. He said things about the last few years that I had not heard him say before. He said that Stephanie had struggled after Theo was born in ways that had changed the household, and that he had been trying to hold everything together, and somewhere along the way had let the most important things slide. He said he hadn't handled the money well. He said he hadn't handled me well. He said he was sorry about Christmas. I listened. I didn't say very much. I poured him a coffee and I let him talk. I did not offer to fix anything. I did not say the assets were available, or that the will could be changed, or that I would make a call to my financial advisor. I did not hand him a solution the way I had spent years handing him solutions. I said, "I love you, and I love Theo, and I want us to be a family again. A real one, not a financial arrangement." He nodded. His eyes were wet, and he looked away, out toward the backyard. Theo finished the biscuit and climbed down off his chair and went to find the box of Duplo I keep in the front room for his visits, the one I had never put away. Caleb and I sat quietly for a while. The coffee went cold. Through the doorway we could hear Theo narrating to himself the private language of a 3-year-old, arranging his world exactly the way he wanted it. It wasn't fixed. I know that. There is no version of this story where 48 hours of honesty undoes years of drift. But we were sitting at the table. We were in the same room. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I hadn't paid for the privilege. That's what I want every father listening to this to understand. Your value is not your account balance. Your presence is not a service. And the day you stop subsidizing people who treat you like a resource is not a failure. It's the first day you start asking to be treated like a person. Theo came back to the kitchen dragging a blue truck he'd apparently decided needed supervision. He set it on my knee and looked up at me with his grandmother's eyes and said, "Pop, fix it." And I did. I still have that envelope on the kitchen counter. The back of it, where I wrote the numbers. I haven't thrown it out, not because I'm bitter. I'm not anymore, but because it reminds me of something I needed to learn late in life, which is that generosity without self-respect isn't generosity at all. It's just a slow way of disappearing. What happened with Caleb didn't happen because he's a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He got caught in something. The pressure of a mortgage, a difficult year after Theo was born, a household dynamic that slowly rewrote his instincts, and he lost his footing. We both did. I kept writing checks because I thought that's what love looked like. He kept accepting them because he thought that's what I was for. That's the part that took me longest to see. I had confused being needed with being valued. Every transfer, every repair, every quiet bailout, I thought I was building closeness. I was building dependency. And dependency, if you let it run long enough, starts to look like contempt. The day I sat down and added up those numbers, something shifted in me. Not rage, not a plan for revenge, just clarity. The kind that arrives when you stop lying to yourself about what's actually happening. I had been funding my own irrelevance, and the only way to stop doing that was to stop doing it. Quietly, without a speech, without a fight, I think about what Theo will understand someday when he's old enough to look back. I hope he sees a grandfather who had the decency to hold a line. Because the world doesn't reward people who cave every time someone they love applies pressure. It rewards people who know what they're worth and act accordingly, not out of arrogance but out of a clear-eyed understanding of cause and effect. You treat people like resources. Eventually the resource relocates. What I did in those 6 weeks, the will, the trust, the house transfer, the silence, none of it came from a place of punishment. It came from a place of finally thinking straight. I had the information. I had the means. What I'd been lacking was the willingness to use my own judgment on my own behalf. That willingness, once found, felt less like a weapon and more like coming home. And here's what I know now, at 64, sitting in the house I built my adult life in, the people who deserve your presence will never make you pay for it. They won't make you prove yourself at the door. They won't take your help and then ask you to be quieter about existing. When Caleb sat at my kitchen table that Saturday and actually talked to me, not about money, not about the HELOC, but about the years between us and what had gone sideways, that was the first time in a long time I felt like his father and not his bank. I don't know what comes next for the two of us. I know that Theo set a plastic truck on my knee and asked me to fix it, and I did, and that felt like enough for one morning. Some things you can't rebuild overnight, but you can start, and you can start from a position of knowing what you stand for, what you'll give freely, what you'll protect quietly, and what you will no longer pretend is acceptable. That's not hardness, that's just the long-earned result of paying attention to your own life.